Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. Labor Day is coming up. We're going to talk about religion. Now, how does religion relate to Labor Day? And how does Labor Day relate to religion? Well, we're going to talk about that tonight with Elsa Peterson-Obachowski. Elsa, first of all, introduce yourself to the audience and to our group here, and tell us a little something about yourself, who you are, where you came from, and what brought you to where you are.
Well, okay, I live in Norwalk, Connecticut, and I'm just, I guess I would say I'm a curious Christian. I've belonged to a variety of different religions in my life. I've been a Quaker, I've been a Buddhist. I go to the First Congregational Church in Norwalk now, and I've just always been very interested in what the Bible has to say about our lives today. And as far as Labor Day goes, I have been a small business owner for most of my adult life. I do editorial services mainly for college textbook publishers. So it's a kind of a genteel industry that I'm in, mostly very nice people. And you get to learn a lot as you work on your different projects. So I guess that's another reason why I get to satisfy my curiosity. And when I was a lot younger, I belonged to a labor union because I worked in a grocery store.
Really?
Yeah, when I was 17, my first real job. Before that, I had worked in my dad's store off and on, but I got a job in a grocery store, and they actually had just changed the law, this was in California, to allow women and minors to lift more than, it was either 20 or 25 pounds on the job. They raised it to 30, and the average bag of groceries was right in that range. So
correct, yeah.
by being able to lift 30 pounds, you were able to lift bags of groceries.
So you were physically qualified to do the heavy lifting that's involved in working in a grocery store.
Correct. So that was my job. I was not a cashier. I was a box girl. They used to call them box boys. And then they started having box girls, and we wore a pink smock over our clothes. Yes.
As opposed to the boys wear blue smocks.
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay.
They didn't have pink smocks for the boys.
Oh, okay.
Definitely.
Now, what did labor unions mean to you at the time? I know you said you belonged to the labor union.
Yeah, it was a requirement.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, good. Okay. So it's your first exposure to labor unions.
Yeah, it was a requirement that you join the union when you worked for the this grocery chain.
So it was a closed shop.
I didn't know what a closed shop was until I went down to get hired. And I was very excited, to be getting this job. And then I found out I had to join this union. And I thought, well, gee, I don't like that idea at all, because they take a certain amount out of your pay. I was just earning a little bit over a few cents over minimum wage.
Yeah.
And they take a few cents out of your pay for every hour that you work or whatever. And so I was complaining to my mom that I didn't think this was fair.
That you had to belong to a labor union. You had to belong to this group of people.
Yeah.
What the heck were they doing for you anyway?
Yeah, right. And she said, well, you know how the law says that you can only lift 30 pounds on the job, so your boss can't tell you to lift a 50-pound bag of dog food or something. And that's because of the influence of labor unions. And I said, no, it isn't. I said, it's a state law. And my mom said, well, where do you think they got the state laws? Why do you think those laws were enacted? It was because the workers banded together and they bargained collectively, and they said, we want these certain provisions. We want a 40-hour work week. We want overtime if we work more than a certain number of hours. We want overtime on weekends, and all these sorts of things. And you wouldn't have that if you didn't have unions. And to me as a 17-year-old, this was news. This was like, whoa.
Well, I'll tell you, 50 years before that, you could have been a kid, a 10-year-old kid, culling through coal on a conveyor belt at the age of 10, not in school because we didn't have public education.
Yes.
You could have been.
I think my mom mentioned something like that.
Yeah, you could have been doing that, working 15-hour days, and by the time you reach the tender age of 15, you might have been missing half of your fingers, because this is what was before there was organized labor and labor unions, and consequently labor laws that protected kids from being exploited.
There we go.
And I think a lot of people, have probably, it's the same way perhaps that that young girls think about feminism and sort of take things for granted, things like
right.
voting.
Yeah.
Yep. So, well, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Oh, well, I don't know. I didn't come here to talk about myself that much, but I was looking up some things in the Bible that have to do with labor.
Ah.
So the
Bible and labor. Okay.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot in the Bible. If you look in the concordance under labor and under work and workers and so forth, there are lots and lots of references. And the first one is when Adam was in the Garden of Eden.
Okay.
So you sort of pictured the Garden of Eden that nobody had to work, right? That Adam and Eve were just kind of sitting around and they just
eating the fruit which just happened to be there.
And yeah, they had everything they needed. But it actually says that God put the man in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it, as in groundskeeper. So he was actually expected to work. That was even before Eve came along.
Yeah, so Adam was actually, according to the Bible, was there to do more than just live off the fat of the land, so to speak.
Yeah, he was there to work. And then, of course, there's the famous passage in the New Testament where the Apostle Paul writes, if someone is unwilling to work, then he should not eat.
Okay, seems reasonable. Because generally speaking, you need to contribute something to society in order to get by.
Right, and I've heard that as a talking point against things like welfare.
Oh yeah,
and Social Security.
It's used as that's the public dole. It's used to berate the public dole. But
right.
How do you feel the correct interpretation of that is?
Well, I don't know if it's the correct interpretation, but my understanding of how it was intended at the time, it had more to do with the investor class versus the working classes.
Oh.
And that in this, I think it was in Thessalonians, yes, it was in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 where he writes that. And apparently they would have these church dinners and everybody would have to do the work to prepare the food and set up the tables and clean up afterwards and so forth.
Everybody?
And yes, and there were apparently certain people in the membership of the church who thought that they were above this. People who perhaps didn't have to work on a daily basis, who made their living from investments or
the investor class, as we speak of them today, people that live off
being landowners,
other people's labor.
Right, and so they thought that they should just be able to show up and be waited upon. And he's saying, no, if you don't work, then you shouldn't be able to participate in these dinners.
So rather than focusing on the lack of labor of poor people, he's actually focusing on the lack of labor on the part of wealthy people.
That's how it seems. Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that that's a widely known aspect of it, but I think I've read that in
certainly food for discussion.
Yeah. And then there's another story that has to do with a landowner, which that was wealth. I mean, in those days, it wasn't so much that you had stocks and bonds.
Still is.
But you had land. And it's usually known as the parable of the wicked tenants, and it's in the Gospel of Matthew, and it's also in the Gospel of Luke.
Yeah.
and it tells about an absentee landlord, somebody who buys land and has a vineyard planted there and hires tenants to work the land. And that an interesting aspect of that I wouldn't have thought of is provided by somebody whose book I have had the privilege to look at in manuscript. It's Professor Bruno Dick from the University of Manitoba. He's a professor of management. And he actually, it's interesting, he says when he goes to conferences of Christian professors of management, they're almost all Republicans. And they've got a very strong political agenda that
they have their opinion,
that he doesn't share. And he comes away confused because he says, well, I thought it was about being a Christian professor of management, not being a Republican professor of management. But anyway, so he points out that the tenants that were hired to work this land might have actually been the former landowners, because what was happening during the time of Christ was that a lot of people were losing their homes to foreclosure, that type of thing, like we see happening in the United States
we've seen
today.
Throughout history, we saw during the Great Depression, where farmers
lost their farms.
Were told that when the farms weren't fertile, and they couldn't grow crops because of the drought that they had in the Midwest, that they couldn't provide for themselves, couldn't repay their loans, and the bank came in with tractors and bulldozed the houses.
That happened to my dad's family. They had to move to town, and then they eventually moved to California. But so he's saying that these tenants who were working the land were probably farmers before who grew a variety of different crops on the land and had some different animals, sheep and goats, maybe, things like that.
So and diversity of farming.
Diversity, yes. Diverse working of the land. And, crop rotation probably, and this type of thing. But this absentee landlord who buys the land just has it all planted as a vineyard, which is a cash crop.
Oh, okay. In other words, a cash crop being something that is not intended to feed the local people, to feed the families. It's intended to package and export somewhere else.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And probably more lucrative.
Right. And it also took a substantial investment, because you had to wait a couple of years for your vines to have fruit, and then another season to make the wine, to age it. So you had to be fairly wealthy to have enough startup capital to put in a vineyard. So I thought that was an interesting point.
So the folks may very well have been owners of the land through misfortune, as happens often to farmers. Farming is a tough life. You can't count on it all the time. You're going to have hard times. Through hard times, they had actually lost their land bought by an investor. They're forced to work their previous owned land for the investor.
Now they become sharecroppers.
Now they become sharecroppers. And of course, in American history, we have a lot of history of sharecropping, both on the part of whites and blacks, and in fact, in California, many Latinos are sharecroppers. They're working somebody else's land and for small wages, and having to buy food at the company store. So that's interesting. Any other good parables?
I got one more. This is the laborers in the vineyard, and this is in the Gospel of Matthew. And I've usually found that the way people react to this one is that they disagree with the message of the parable. And the story is that the owner of the vineyard, or I don't know if it was a vineyard, it may have been just a farm. Anyway, he needed workers for the harvest or something.
Right, and of course harvesting is on a very tight schedule. Once the fruit's ripe, once it's ready to harvest, you better harvest it quick.
Got to get it in.
Or else it falls off and rots.
Right. So he hires people at daybreak and agrees to pay them the going rate, which is 1 denarius per day. And they go out and they start working. And then a few hours later, around 9 o'clock in the morning, he goes back into town and finds some more workers and asks them to come, and they come out and they start working.
What does he go back for more workers?
It's not clear. That's not explained in the parable. Maybe he just didn't have enough people.
I guess that makes sense.
Or maybe the people weren't working fast enough. I don't know.
He realized that there was more to harvest than he figured, so he needs more workers, and now it's a little later into the day.
Right.
And he goes back to hire more workers. Now, does he hire them at fraction of a day rate?
Well, it doesn't say what kind of agreement he has with them. But then he goes back again in the afternoon at 3 o'clock, and then he goes back at 5 o'clock. And that's the only time at 5 o'clock that we hear his conversation with the workers.
Okay.
He sees these guys hanging out in the market square or wherever, or if it was in Stamford, it would be on the on-ramp
where
to
day
I-95,
laborers would stay,
where the day laborers
for work.
hang out. Yeah. And he says, "Why aren't you working?" And they said, "Because nobody has hired us yet." So they've been waiting all day.
They've been actually waiting all day, and anybody that's worked and not worked knows that not working, being laid off, and having a period of inactivity is much worse than actually working. Work is a relief for people that haven't been fortunate enough to work for a period of time. Even the better part of a day, you're hoping that somebody will come along and give you something to do and pay you for it.
Yeah.
So he goes back at 5 o'clock.
It's at 5 o'clock.
And more workers he hires.
And he brings more workers.
Yeah.
Right. So then the day is over, and the day is over probably around 6 or 7 o'clock.
Okay.
You know? And the owner tells the manager to bring in the workers and pay them, but he says bring in the 5 o'clock workers first.
Yeah.
And give them 1 denarius each.
Really? Okay.
So the other workers see this and they think, oh, great, that means we're going to get more.
Right, because we work more hours, so proportionately we should get more.
Yeah. So especially the people who started at sunrise are probably really, really excited.
It seems fairly reasonable. I would probably feel that way myself.
Right. But that's not what happens. They all get paid the same. They all get paid 1 denarius.
And why is that?
Well, it says in the Bible that they grumbled about this, and that the owner said, well, look, I agreed when I hired you to pay you 1 denarius.
Yes, that's right.
Why should you be envious because I am generous?
Oh, okay. In other words, he wasn't breaking their promise to the people that he hired at Sunrise. He kept his contract with them
going rate.
And paid them exactly what he contracted to pay them for them to work for the entire day.
Right.
So people come in a little later in the morning, and they're going to work a little shorter period of time because he needed more people to get the job done, and he's paying them the full day's wage. And
that's his
likewise, people that come in later in the day, because he needs more workers to get the job done, and he's paying them the same amount of money. So he hasn't turned his back on the people that started at dawn. He's giving them, he's not refusing to pay them.
Right.
But he's giving everyone the same amount of money because that's the contract that he's striking with them during the day.
Right.
Every group that goes back and says, well, okay, you work the rest of the day and I'll pay you 1 denar.
Right. So I think when I've heard this in church, the interpretation is usually that everybody who's faithful is going to go to heaven. So you don't get a better deal in heaven because you were a Christian for longer years out of your life, or because you did more or something. And so that actually kind of reminds me of some of the sentiments that we have been seeing in the news about unionized workers, bringing us back around to Labor Day.
Yeah.
The Wisconsin situation with the state workers and taking away their collective bargaining rights, and people saying, well, I never had any collective bargaining rights in the first place, so why should they have any? And here in Connecticut, talking about layoffs or wage freezes or making them pay for a larger portion of their health care.
Yeah.
Within the state unions, and people saying, well, I don't have any health care, or I don't have any this or that.
That relates to the grumbling. It's just the grumbling, if we'll call it, because the same thing that happened in the parable, where people aren't getting as good of a deal because they worked the extra hours.
Right. Now, in this case, we're getting somebody like me, I'm a small business owner, I
Yeah.
have to pay for my own health insurance
Sure, yeah.
completely. Nobody helps me pay for it.
Because
of course,
we didn't pass that bill that would have allowed you to buy into the system.
yes, which I'm still hoping that one of these years that will get passed.
Yeah.
But okay, I mean, that's a choice I made,
Yeah.
and I understand that because there are trade-offs and there are advantages to working on my own that
Yeah.
I enjoy very, very much. And my clients do pay me, so I take the money that I get from them, and one of the things I use it for is to pay for my health insurance.
Yeah.
But if I felt resentful against people who are in a union, it wouldn't, I just don't see that that would do me any good, because I could have made a choice like that. I could have made
Yeah.
a career choice, and I didn't. I chose to do what I'm doing
Right.
because I like the independence of it, and I feel more secure in my job because I have a variety of clients. So if one client discontinues a project, I actually had a project canceled this
Yeah.
summer. The publisher pulled out of the whole series of books that they were thinking of coming out with. I have plenty of others that I can fall back on, and I have plenty of doors I can knock on.
Yeah.
So, that's a choice that I made.
Would it be fair to throw the hot potato back in the lap of the grumblers and say to them, well, why are you grumbling about the fact that union employees are getting better benefits? Well, why the heck aren't you unionized?
Yeah.
If you wanted,
Sure.
If you wanted the kind of benefits, why not go to the trouble that union employees went to
Yeah.
in order to become union employees so they could collectively bargain?
Yes, absolutely.
And
Talk to
obviously,
your coworkers.
and
see
likewise
what you
with
can do.
feminists,
Yeah.
likewise with feminists, not knowing what their moms did, what their grandmas did.
Yeah.
Union workers had people that came before them who paid their dues, who
Yeah.
stood on picket lines, who in a lot of cases in America were shot by police and by, well, more goons than police, the goons that the boss would hire to try to de-unionize them. And they went through all that stuff in order to stay unionized, in order to make it work. And why can't these grumblers go through that same process to get to
Yeah.
that? If they want to be as well paid
Sure.
and have the benefits of a union employee, for gosh sakes, form a union.
Yep. Organize.
Where in the world would Jesus be in all this? Would Jesus? I hear stories from folks, and even folks here on Comcast that talk about Jesus. They frame Jesus in terms of a guy that wants you to work hard and get wealthy.
Well, I think he does. He probably does want you to work hard. Now we have in Galatians and in Ephesians and Colossians, we have passages about working hard. Servants, obey your master. Work wholeheartedly. Work enthusiastically.
Yep.
But it also says, masters, treat your servants justly and fairly, because you all actually have one master, which is God.
So it places the employer and the employee on the same plane in terms of importance.
Well, in the sense that that everyone, no matter what level of worker they are, they should be thinking about, how am I serving God in what I'm doing, not just how am I making money.
Or for the non-believer, doing the right thing. Because, of course, people that aren't even religious in a sense still have a moral compass and still strive to do the right thing by their fellow human beings.
Right. So I think there is a work ethic that we've heard for a couple centuries about the Protestant work ethic, and I think that's a little bit of a different thing than what we really see when we try to understand the Bible. But and I'm not an authority on the Protestant work ethic, so I probably shouldn't go off in that direction too much.
Well, we've heard a lot about this Protestant work ethic and how apparently only Protestants perhaps should be benefiting from the Protestant work ethic.
Yeah, I guess there are people who kind of think of it that way. So that's not where I'm going with this. But
Okay, go ahead, yeah.
but I think the Bible does say that we should work. We shouldn't just sit around and wait for God to bring riches to us or to provide for our needs. But that the purpose of work is not to get rich. The purpose of work is to contribute to the fabric of society. Because we live on Earth, we're going to be, at some other point, we're going to be in some other realm. But for the time that we're here, we're here to try to make things work well for everyone. That doesn't mean denying yourself, but also means that you don't deny others.
Right.
And that you want to be fair and just.
In other words, it's in fact, according to the teachings of Jesus, it's not a dog-eat-dog world.
Right.
It's not trump on the other guy in order to get ahead. And unfortunately, it seems like that happens a lot where people tread on other people on the way up the corporate ladder. Mm. And what I'm hearing is that that's really not the way it should be. That
is not the way it should be. And there's, within management now, there's the servant leadership kind of principle, which is now being written up in a lot of mainstream textbooks. And servant leadership is sort of ties into the Christian concept of stewardship, which I'm sure other religions have too, where you're here to take care of resources for everyone's good.
Interesting. Well, that's an awful lot to digest. Will you come back and do a second show, and we can talk some more about those specific things?
Maybe.
Okay.
I appreciate the invitation.
Okay,
That's
I appreciate your considering it. This is Progressive Soup. David Stevenson, Elsa Obachowski. Good night.
We got a minute more to kill.
Really? Okay, well, what are we going to talk about in the second show? Let's decide now.
I don't know what to say because
he gave me the 1 minute warning.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about perhaps maybe you talked a little bit about Wisconsin and the attack by the Governor Walker in Wisconsin, attacking the unions. And again, religion and how it relates to that. We'll come back and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes through the miracle of television. It's Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. Elsa Obachowski. See you back here in a couple of minutes. Thanks.
Thanks.
So I'm going to pretend I'm presuming that I can't. Presuming we've cut. See, this is where I needed to see the television.
Yeah.
It's the television just once. I know that.
Much for being here, Rick. We're going to be with you again next week. And with that, I thank you very much for being here on the program, Joy and Rick. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm, of course, Kevin Gallagher. Please tune in again next week to see...